At this time, on Sunday, September 13th, 2015, I was sitting in my aunt's house in total shock of what just happened. My grandpa, my very best friend, passed away unexpectedly. He called for me to be his rescue, the one that called 911. Scared, confused, and only 10 years old, I did just that, and my brother and I laid by his side as he stopped breathing on the dining room floor. Today marks 5 years since that very day, and while it does get easier, it gets 10 times harder. But being a Christian isn't easy, and we all know that. When God placed it on my heart to sing today, I was unsure that I could. In fact, I still remember the look on my grandma's face. Though she was puzzled, she still supported me and cheered me on, just like everyone else did. The lyrics in this song may not mean the same to you as they do to me, and that's okay. They don't have to. If there's one thing that you can take away from this song, let it be that no matter how hard it seems right now, God will rescue you. And even if it still hurts, 5 years later, it must rain on the flowers for them to blossom. This one's for you, Papa. You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless. Though you have been broken, your innocence stolen. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. I will send down an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. There is no distance that cannot be covered over and over. You're not defenseless. I'll be your shelter, I'll be your armor. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear
Roxanne, Amanda, Emily, and Joey, we love you, and we're praying for you. You know it's a tough day. Thank you for that beautiful song. Do you know my King? I hope you do.
Yes.
And this morning we're going to have our second lesson in this series, and I've entitled it this, His Kingdom Has a Code of Conduct. Just for fun, you know, when we think of the scriptures, if you want to have fun with people, tell them some scriptures from time to time, just your friends, your family, and undoubtedly somewhere along the way, someone will say, that's not in the Bible, I don't think. So I've got a question. I have 3 scriptures this morning, or 3 sayings. You tell me if they're in the Bible or not, okay? Raise your right hand if they're in the Bible, raise your left hand if they're not, okay? And I'll have to think in reverse. Here we go. All right. So the first one is this: give beer to those who are perishing, wine to those who are in anguish. If it's yes, right hand, no, left hand.
Can I do this?
Undecided, 3 points, okay.
No.
It is. It's in
I know
Proverbs
wine.
31:6.
I know wine, but
Yeah.
I didn't know about the beer.
Well, it's strong drinking, the King James.
Oh, all right, but
Okay.
that's what threw me
Okay,
off.
how about this one? But whoever sacrifices a bull is like one who kills a man, and whoever offers a lamb like one who breaks a dog's neck.
No,
Yes or no?
no.
Okay, we have one strong, bold guy over here.
No.
Yes, it
Oh,
is.
yeah. Why?
Isaiah chapter 66, all right?
What
You can look it up later.
What version?
It's probably the NIV. How about this one? God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, look at everybody left hand. Okay, not a lot of people believe that, right? And sometimes we are surprised by things we read in the scriptures. At other times, it's a normal part of our conversation. There's certain phrases and quotes from the Bible that have become a normal part of the way we speak to each other. For instance, the apple of your eye is out of Psalm 17. Sour grapes, the prophet Jeremiah mentioned that. Nothing new under the sun. Where's that, men?
Yeah,
Ecclesiastes, yeah.
Ecclesiastes.
And skin of my teeth. Who said that? Was it a dentist? Job.
Yep.
It was Job. And as English-speaking people, we often find ourselves using the vocabulary of ancient Israel. And in our text this morning, we'll be considering a remarkable number of Hebrew idioms. So let's have our scripture up on the screen, Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 42. This will be up here for quite a while, but let's read it. It says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." In these 5 verses, we encounter many familiar sayings. One is an eye for an eye, turn the other cheek, the shirt off your back, or go the extra mile. And what we need to remember as we look at this passage, at this sermon that Jesus preached, the Sermon on the Mount, it is a kingdom message. And the kingdom has a king. The king has a mission, and he has an ideal for living the kingdom life. This standard that the king has is not this. It's not that you can clean up real nice. Because the Pharisees and the religious leaders of Jesus' time were excellent at cleaning up real nice. That was not, it is not the goal in kingdom living. The target in kingdom living is inward transformation. And anyone, almost anyone who reads through the Sermon on the Mount will come away with that. The emphasis is on the inner person. The Sermon on the Mount is, in a sense, a code of conduct. And I was thinking about this the last several days and was kind of trying to figure out how I could frame this. And really, code of conduct is what came to mind. Almost every school I ever attended, and even some employers, had a written code of conduct. How many of you remember going to school and they handed out a code of conduct? If you're really old, they probably hung it on the wall, right? Yeah, I mean, I remember that, you know, these are the class rules, and probably right next to the Ten Commandments, right, which are a good code as well.
And the paddle of
And
education.
the Board of Education, yeah, and bend over. I had a teacher that bend over in the Board of Education, but perhaps the simplest definition is one that I found online, which says this, quote, a code of conduct is a set of rules outlining the norms, rules, and responsibilities or proper practices of an individual party or an organization. And so I believe, end of quote. What I believe Jesus is doing here is he's telling us what kingdom living looks like. This is the king's ideal for the kingdom. But we must proceed with caution. It occurred to me as I thought of this, that we have to be careful or we might find ourselves just cleaning up with a new set of rules.
That's right.
All the while still lacking the inward changes that reflect kingdom citizenship. So first, what we have to do is step out of the 21st century and ask, what do these things mean? Or probably more correctly, what did they mean? What did they mean? Not what do they mean to me right now, but what did they mean? What did the hearers of Jesus hear when he spoke these things to them? You know, if something happened over hundreds of years that has caused us to misunderstand Jesus, we're missing out. And I hope that we can all agree on that point. Put another way, what Jesus said to the crowd on the side of the mountain is what we must come to understand. Not what I think it means, but we must come on to understand what the people heard Jesus say, what Jesus actually said to them. So what does our King say to us in Matthew chapter 5? What was Jesus saying? He said this, you have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. One commentator explains the use of resist in this verse like this, and this is a word study. In short, this word means more than just simply to stand or resist. It means to resist violently, to revolt, to rebel, to engage in an insurrection, or to plan a counterattack. And so Jesus is saying, don't, when someone insults you, don't come back guns blazing. Now, is that easy? Because most of us want to do what? We're going to retaliate. This is not going to go on for very long. That's the way we are. And Jesus is quoting a well-known passage of Scripture that is found in the Pentateuch in two places at least, one in Leviticus 24. We don't have it on the screen. But listen, it says this, Leviticus 24, verses 19 and 20. If anyone injures his neighbor, whatever he has done must be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has injured the other, so he is to be injured. Now in Exodus 21, same thing. But if there's a serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn. Man, that's painful, isn't it? Wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And so this is what Jesus is referring to. And of course the people had heard it because the people on the side of the mountain who were listening to Jesus or who were gathered to listen to him were Hebrews, right? And they had these. And so Jesus said, you've heard this. In Greek, we call this the lex talionis, the law of retaliation. In a more very simplistic way, I don't know that I've ever heard this here, but where I grew up down south, we called it the law of tit for tat. You do to me, I'll do to you, right? Right, Bob? We're from the same area. But Jesus redirects our thinking in this regard. Like the people that Jesus spoke to as he preached this sermon, we have begun to see this as a license to take revenge. That's why he uses that word resist, which means to violently oppose and scheme away. We see it as a license to take revenge, and that is not, I don't believe, that's far from God's intent in giving this law. because this law was not meant to be cruel and bloodthirsty commandment. Rather, it was given as an act of mercy from the heart of God. And the reason it was, I believe, an act of mercy from the heart of God are these. One, it limited vengeance. Punishment was limited to the equivalent of the offense. Man, people sometimes ask me, if you could change something in your life, what would you change? And often I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure what I would change, but there are instances in my life, like a time where my brother and I had a disagreement in a little Honda Civic. We're riding down the road. My brother slapped me, and I didn't slap him back. You know what I did? I knocked his teeth out, literally. And he jumped out of the car. It was a really bad situation. He had to, and I'm not a tough guy. I just got an unlucky shot, I'll call it. But the point is this, that I retaliated. Had I just kind of thumped him in the head, well, I did thump him in the head. I broke his glasses first. You know how it goes. It goes back and forth, right? It gets worse and worse. And the crazy thing is, we were arguing about who broke in and vandalized the church.
Oh, no.
Two good youth group kids, right? Well, one, my brother. I was a scoundrel that day, I guess. But an eye for an eye says that you're not going to do crazy things like that. You're not going to beat someone down because they hurt you or insult you. An eye for an eye also protects the innocent, because only the man who committed the wrong would be punished, no one else in his family. And we've heard about feuds between families, right? And I suppose it probably happens here. I know it happens down south. There's families. You're just careful. You don't want to offend them, because you're not going to deal with one guy. You're going to deal with maybe 30. But that law of retaliation protected the innocent. Only the offender could be punished. Thirdly, it wasn't given to the individual's discretion in executing judgment. In Exodus 35, verse 9 through 15, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites, say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, select some towns to be your cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. They will be places of refuge from the avenger, so that a person accused of murder may not die before he stands trial before the assembly." See, God is ready to protect people, and you can even accidentally do something, and God is there to give you a hearing before the assembly. The law of retribution was a law of mercy, not revenge. We need to understand that. Of course, we often tend to what? Lean toward revenge. There's a story about a place in Nebraska called Broken Bow, and a weary truck driver pulled his rig into an all-night truck stop. He was tired, he was hungry. The waitress had just served 3 tough-looking, leather-jacketed motorcyclists, the Hells Angels type, and they decided to give him a hard time. Not only did they verbally abuse him, one grabbed the hamburger off his plate, another took a handful of his French fries, and the third picked up his coffee and began to drink it. So how did this trucker respond? Well, this trucker did not respond as you might expect. Instead, he calmly rose, picked up his check, walked to the front of the room, put the check and his money on the register, and went out the door. Wow. Don't you wish you could be like that? The waitress followed him to put the money in the till and stood watching out the door as the big truck drove away into the night. So she walks back in, and one of the cyclists said to her, "Well, he's not much of a man, is he?" She replied, "I don't know about that, but he sure isn't much of a truck driver. He just ran over 3 motorcycles on his way out of the parking lot." And I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's me. That's what I want. That's how we feel, isn't it? I'm still waiting on the day when I'm in the express lane and the person in front of me has 30 items and the checker says, which 10 are you purchasing? That's what I want to see. But Jesus says this. He says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, what?
Give them the other.
Turn to him the other also. You know, turn to him the other also. And we misunderstand this because we read our 21st century understanding into another time and place, another time and culture. And culturally, this passage teaches us much more than just how to handle a right to the jaw. Now, most people are right-handed. Even in biblical times, most people were right-handed. And I know all you left people are going to say, we're the only people in our right mind. You can say that, but culturally we understand that most people are right-handed. So I don't think Bob would mind to come up here. Come up here, Bob. And I trust him not to really hit me. All right? Now you're right-handed, so you would use, now don't stand like that, please. Okay. I want you to use your right hand and hit me on the right cheek. Use your right hand. Okay. How's that? Good. Okay. Good. You did good. All right. Thing is, if you are right-handed and you hit someone on the right cheek, you can't hook them. Because if you hook them, where are you going to hit them? On the left cheek. And it can only be done with a backhanded slap. He's a little flexible, I guess, but mostly it would be like this, right here. And this is important. It's a cultural nuance here. According to Jewish rabbinic law, to hit a man with the back of the hand was twice as insulting as it was to hit a man with the palm of the hand. Now guys, can you imagine if somebody just walked up to you and slapped you on the face? Wouldn't you be offended? And rabbinic law said that if you got hit with the back of the hand, it was twice the insult. We have some semblance of this concept in our modern day language. We may say something like this, quote, that comment was a real slap in the face. Right? End of quote. And when we get insulted, I'm just going to speak for myself. When I get insulted, my brain goes into gear and I'm ready to do what? Insult someone else. And Jesus says, don't be like that. There was a story about a band director and he was having a lot of trouble with the percussion section because Dave, where are you, Dave? Is Dave in here? Dave, drummers are hard, aren't they? You know, they don't always act like you think. I think they're pretty awesome. My younger brother with the fake teeth, he also is a drummer and I love him. But so this band director was having trouble with the drummers, and he talked and talked and he talked to the drummer, but nothing happened. Finally, in front of the whole orchestra, he said this: when a musician just can't handle his instrument and doesn't improve when given help, they take away the instrument, give him 2 sticks, and make him a drummer. A whisper was heard from the percussion section, and if he can't handle even that, they take away one of his sticks and make him a conductor. All right? So I wish I was like that. I wish I could come up with those things. But it wouldn't suit me as a kingdom person, would it? It's really less about physical injury because we're not talking about the kind of punch that's going to knock you out or even knock you on the ground. It's more about insult. This man, us in this story as kingdom people, when we are struck in this way, we are insulted as an inferior. And so Jesus says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, why would Jesus say that? Well, if my striker, come back up here again, right-handed striker, he has just come and he's backhanded me here, and I'm going to turn this way. How can he hit me now? He can't backhand me again. He can only hit me as an equal. Go ahead and sit down. Was that hardly even worth standing up for, right? But he would have to hit me in the more respectful way. It's almost impossible for him to backhand me if I turn my other cheek. He has to come straight on. And the second hit says this, will you hit me again? And if so, you will hit me as an equal. This is the way the Jewish, I believe the Jewish mind would have seen it. You see, our nature tells us to retaliate and strike back immediately, to insult. But when we do so, rather than turning the other cheek, when we do so, we become the very thing we're fighting against. Right? And in adopting the methods of injury and insult, we're overcome by an enemy more harmful than the man who strikes us. And it says in Romans 12:21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with what? Good. Good. Two little boys, Harry and James, were playing after supper, and Harry hit James with a stick. Tears, bitter words followed, and Mother intervened. She said, now James, before you go to bed, you're going to have to forgive your brother. And James thought for a while in silence, and finally he spoke up and said, well, okay, I'll forgive him tonight, but if I don't die before I wake up, you better watch out in the morning, okay? And what Jesus is saying to us is, listen, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Of course, he didn't. It says that in Romans, but he says, turn the other cheek. Don't retaliate right away. Don't return insult for insult. And how much harder it is to forgive an insult than an injury, I believe. Insults are generally intentional and they're generally malicious. And we can only restrain ourselves when we remember our King. When we remember who we are made to be. You know, there's so many times in my lives that I wished I just had a brother or sister by my side to say, hey Brian, that's not who you are. That's not who you are. You're God's son. Or maybe I could say to you, you're God's son, or you're God's daughter, you're God's child. That's not who you are. That's not the way of the kingdom. It's not the way of the King. It is only the truly strong who can be meek. Where do you get your strength from? The Lord, I hope. And really, meekness is strength under control. Jesus demonstrated this very strength. And it wasn't a strength that went unnoticed. He was unjustly tried. He was beaten several occasions, insulted, spat upon, had his beard pulled out, was caused to drag his cross through the city of Jerusalem with people gawking and standing the whole time. And yet at the end of this, in Mark chapter 15, verse 39, a Roman officer said this was his confession, quote, surely this man was the Son of God, end of quote. Oh, that I could be a person that someone would see my response to injustice and say, isn't that guy must be God's son. Not in the same way Jesus is, but I'm a child of God. Paul the Apostle. I was trying to think of different biblical illustrations. Paul the Apostle was nearly beaten in a Roman city. And so we're going to look at it. Acts 22, verses 23 to 25, and then we're going to jump ahead to 28. Okay, to Acts 22, verse 23, I'm pretty sure. Yep. As they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air. Now they're angry at Paul, right? The commander ordered Paul to be taken into the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and questioned in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. So what's going to happen to Paul? He's going to be flogged. This isn't a belt whipping right here. This is a terrible punishment that could border on a deadly result. So in verse 25, as they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? Let's go to the next verses, which begin in verse 28. Then the commander said, I had to pay a big price for my citizenship. But I was born a citizen, Paul replied. Those who were about to question him withdrew immediately. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. And so Paul endured embarrassment. Paul was dragged off. Paul had had dirt thrown all over him. Most of us would be screaming back at the crowd, right? And most of us would have been screaming at the commander. You're an idiot. What, you don't know what you're doing. You better check things out first. But Paul didn't do this. But what Paul did is he just brought it up at the right moment. He had been insulted by the crowd. He had been insulted by the commander. And Paul turns the other cheek. He restrains his probably fleshly desire to retaliate. And he says, I was born a citizen. And as a result of this embarrassment, this city, Philippi, was the only city where believers were protected from persecution from Rome that we know of, as far as the biblical cities mentioned. And I think perhaps this is a great example of turning the other cheek. So in conclusion, I want to say this morning that some have misinterpreted this phrase, turn the other cheek, to mean that we must take whatever our enemies send our way. In a way, that's true, insofar as we are not undone to the point of a loss of control. We don't need to go out of control. But it's more. It's the way of a man or woman who knows who is king. Listen, they're going to slap you. That's okay. Because you have a mighty king.
That's right. He knows.
It's the way of wisdom in not answering insult with insult, but rather standing strong in the truth. Turn that other cheek and speak the truth. So my heart, my desire for myself is, may we learn to rest in the confidence. May I